Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Graham Wade, President and Chairman of CPA Australia. I'm a very proud one at that. Particularly proud when I see the organisation on display as it is at Congress. For those that were not at lunch today, that was a fantastic leadership talk by Christine Nixon, one of our locals. And this afternoon we've got an international speaker, Andreas Weigend, who is very excited to be in Melbourne, telling me that Melbourne is his favourite food city. So he'll get to talk a bit about that, I think. As a member of CPA Australia, you should be accustomed to having friends in high places, and today at CPA Congress, some friends from our member benefits program have brought to you some very special offers. By filling out the entry forms on your tables and leaving behind for one of our team members to collect, you could win a lease on a BMW of your choice through National Fleet for a month. Other prizes on offer through member benefits include a state-of-the-art TV with our new partner JB Hi-Fi, and our friends at American Express are offering special welcome gifts of 35,000 points for new card holders, plus a chance to win tickets to see the Eagles for those people who are 80 plus in the audience. And you've also got all our other sponsors out there. We love you to support the sponsors in the sponsors hall. They sponsor us and look after us in a big way and support our organisation. So great if you can spend some time looking at what they've got to offer. So, without further ado, our second keynote speaker is going to teach us how to leverage and understand social data revolution. He's all the way from the United States. It's Dr. Andreas Weigend. No relation to the Andreas fault line, he assures me. He's an expert in social and mobile technologies and new ways of collecting and using social data. He teaches at Stanford University, Berkeley, and China's CKGSB. And he's received a PhD from physics from Stanford, just like yours truly. That's a coincidence. And he's studying in Germany and Cambridge and in the UK. So he's a very busy boy. He's a former chief scientist at Amazon. He helped create the firm's data strategy and customer-centric culture. Andreas founded the Social Data Lab, which connects faculty and students with companies looking to find new forms of engagement with their customers. So he's clearly at the cutting edge of the way the world's heading. We all hear about big data, and I don't think it's a passing trend. It's clearly something that is going to really drive business and understanding customers. He consults widely to innovative startups and large corporations, and he'll share with you today insights on untapped power of data and its irreversible impact on individuals, business and society. And I'd personally like him to explain how he thinks green shoelaces go with his shoes, but I'll leave that with him. Andreas, over to you.
Thank you, Graham. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be here. And as Graham said, Melbourne really is my favorite food city in the world. I tried to find a place for laksa yesterday, and I didn't find it. I was here once before, and it was the best laksa of my life. So if anybody here has some idea where I can get good laksa, please let me know after my talk. Now, I'm going to talk to you about big data and big decisions. And I want you to start by imagining something. Imagine you had all the data of the world readily available at your fingertips. What would you do with it? So, when we talk about big data, we all know that today, in just a single day, we create more data than mankind did from its very beginning through the year 2000. Not that long ago. You probably all remember where you were when Y2K happened, or didn't happen. That worry that in our accounting systems, when we suddenly changed the first digits from 19 to 20, that some bad things would happen. Not that long ago. Now in one day, we create more data than we did from the very beginning of the universe till that moment. Now, if you think about the last century, I think it was a century of the physical sciences. As Graham pointed out, I did my PhD actually in physics. I worked in high energy physics where we looked at particles which we shot against each other to measure the interactions between those particles. So we could say, in the 20th century, things became measurable, things in physics became measurable. And I'm probably with you here. When people ask me what to do well, I tell them I really only can do one thing, which is count. But knowing what to count and like what ratios to form, that really is, I think, the art. So in the last century, I was in physics, and what we counted was what is happening in these bubble chambers where particles leave traces. That was the century of physical sciences. This century, I think, is the century of human interactions. We measure the social interactions between people. And one prime example for that, of course, is Facebook. And I would like to have a show of hands here. Who of you has a Facebook account? Almost everybody. All right? So that means that you are part of being instrumented. When you like something, when you like somebody, you are leaving, a trace of that liking that something or that somebody. So if we think about it, last century we measured the physical world. This century we are measuring the human world, the social world. 1984. Some of you might remember, actually my students weren't even born then. But some of you might remember that George Orwell wrote a book with that title. And what I think happened in 84 for me was that we managed to connect computers. 94, we managed to connect pages. So of course they needed computers, but if you think about pages being connected, Google is the company that had an algorithm called PageRank that looked at those connected pages, that connectivity structure, at those data, the traces people leave by linking to pages to figure out which page should come up when I'm entering CPA Australia. Because many pages have that word in it, but that page that most people link to is the one which has the highest page rank. That was 94. 2004, Facebook was started, and that was about connecting people. 2004 also was a year when in Shanghai I had a debate with Jack Ma about the future of e-commerce, where we were on Christmas Day actually in Shanghai talking about how do we see, I was a chief scientist at Amazon at the time, how do we see the future of e-commerce, China versus United States? And there was one thing, many things we agreed on, and that was the importance of data. And Jack actually said during that debate, don't call me Jack Ma. Call me Data Ma. And you know what happened 10 years later? The world's largest IPO. One of the things we agreed on in this debate was that we often heard that story, that we start with data. We then create insights, knowledge, wisdom, and some even say wonder. And we agreed that that is all bullshit. What really matters is what you do with it. So what mattered is to have that mindset of taking action, not just of counting, but of actually making decisions based on what you see. So when people ask me, what is big data? I typically say, it is the mindset to turn mess into meaning, or even more importantly, to turn data into decisions. So in the first part of my talk, I'm going to take you to some of these data sources. And it is basically by now that every step you take, every cake you bake, every fake you make, and that is thinking about China, of course. Every time you wake, every time you take a break, and, every decision you make, you leave data. Now, A couple of examples. I'm wearing Google Glass here, and I'm going to turn it on. And what I'm doing now is I'm recording the way I see the talk I'm giving here, and I'll share it with you afterwards. And for me, Google is a beautiful example of a company that really takes data and turns them into decisions. So an example of decisions is when you have a navigator. In the navigator, that is an example of a phygital device, of something which bridges between the physical world and the digital world. And when I thought about this for this talk, I realized that pretty much all sensors in this connected world are phygital devices because they measure something in the physical world and then they talk about it to other sensors. They call it Internet of Things now. But for me, it's just phygital. So what is glass? Three things. One, it is a data creation device, like what I'm doing right now, taking a video. Two, it is a data consumption device. So Google is a data refinery that offers me things ordered, responses to a query, directions. But more than anything else, do you know how I see glass? For me, it is a social experiment. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how different people react to this asymmetry of, maybe me knowing something about them and they not knowing what I'm seeing. So for me, it is just a social experiment. It's playing with things which are pretty rare right now, but in a few years, we all will be having some kind of devices which tell us something about the other person and which, of course, allow us to record things. How will that change the balance of power? It's a question I'll visit at the end of the talk. So what does Google know? Google knows where I live. Of course, Google knows where all of you live, because that's where you're checking your Gmail from. Or if you have a car, that's where you start your journeys and where the car ends up at night. I have a little thought experiment, which I just talked about in my class last week. There are many cameras in the United States and also in Australia that just take number plates, pictures of cars driving by, and the purpose of a number plate, of a license plate, clearly is to identify the car. Nothing funny about this. No, weird things. No, the purpose of the number plate is to know what car it is. Now, they even pay people now to put these little cameras into their houses, in their front windows, and look at the cars going by. You think, there's no expectation of privacy on the street. If you're driving by, somebody could write it down and they just have a camera. Okay. They even pay people to put it on your dashboard, of course with a GPS, and just look at other cars driving by. Okay. Now, where it really gets weird, where we move from this quantitative to a qualitative difference is, and I want to ask you the question, what do you think about this? You can now query for a certain fee where that car has been, basically 24/7 every day of the year. Now, when your partner comes home and says, wow, I had so much work in the office today, tax season coming up, and you do a quick ping with that car license plate, which you of course know because, it's your partner's car, and you know that he left the office 3 hours ago and just took some little stop somewhere. What do you think about that? So in many cases, just by putting data together that by themselves are not weird, we can learn all kinds of things. In my case, here's where I teach, and here's where I eat because they have the best free lunches at Facebook and at Google. Now, why would I share this with Google? Well, the traffic in the Bay Area is quite bad. It's actually a good indication of the economy. The worse the traffic, the better the economy. And there are two routes to go from San Francisco to Stanford, 101 and 280. And I tell Google where I am, or rather my navigator does, and I tell it where I want to go. And then it tells me, right now, 101 is the better traffic. Now, when I was a postdoc at Xerox PARC, we built complicated models which ran on big computers trying to simulate the traffic. And we called it that we moved from laminar flow to turbulent flow, basically traffic jam, when certain conditions were met. Now, we don't need complicated models anymore. All we need to do is we need to observe how the mobile phones that are moving on those streets move. And from that, we know what the traffic is. So when I asked you if you had all the data in the world readily available at your fingertips, what would you do with it? One way is probably to figure out which route you would take. So here, I gave you the example of geolocation data, which I think actually is way more personal and way more private than most of us think. Next example, searches. At Google, if you go to google.com/history and you log in, you find out how many searches are stored about your history. In my case, 15,317. Who of you would be comfortable in having all their searches displayed here? Nobody. Neither would I be. But we share it with Google. So, one of the things people always ask, what is the value of data? And I have two answers for that. One is data is worth as much as somebody is paying for it. So, how much would you pay if you knew where I have been? How much would you pay if you knew what I've searched for? How much would you pay if you knew every single thing I bought? Or who my friends are? The social graph, the connections I have with people. Maybe confirmed, maybe me just checking up on them, whether they uploaded a new picture of themselves. Or the fifth one is, how much would you pay if you knew my demographics, as many traditional marketing firms would try to sell you? So which data would you pay most for? Between 3 and 4. The question here is, or in China is the question between purchase history, which is Alibaba, or social graph, which is WeChat. In the US, it's a question between Amazon and between Facebook. So the market isn't clear yet. And it's of course the case that it's only worth as much as somebody's paying for it. The other answer to this question, which I like better, is the value of data is the impact it has on decisions. So when people talk about their own data and how much it must be worth, and that Google or Facebook should be paying them for all the data they're giving to them, I have only to ask the question, what decisions depend on those data? And if the answer is, well, not really all that much, well then the value really isn't all that much. So when you get asked the question about value of data, very pragmatic here. It is how much it impacts decisions. So when Jodie and I talked about the talk here, she said, people would love to hear about data-driven decision-making. I have to tell you, I think data-driven is not happening. It always should be people-driven. I don't want to have my decisions made by data. I want to have my decisions made by people, of course supported by data. So for me, it is not that we start with the data, but we start with a question. And that, for me, is the most important rule number 1 for big data. Don't start with the data, start with a question. And rule number 2 is focus on the decision and focus on the actions you can take. And then probably not so familiar with you, because that's a different word from yours, is that designing for feedback. If you think about innovation, I would say that most of the innovation of the last 20 years was innovation based on data. And then if you look a little bit more deeply, unpacking that, I would think it is actually most innovation is based on the fact that we can do experiments. Experiments, no negative connotations here, but on people and with people by trying out different things. I ran hundreds of experiments when I was chief scientist at Amazon, just to figure out how can we delight the customer. So, if you think about it as a social data revolution, the three companies which I've been mentioning so far, they all, through their experimentation, changed the way 1 billion people think. Think about how you buy things. And I would argue that for 1 billion people, Amazon and other e-commerce companies have changed the way they make purchasing decisions. You look at reviews, you look at what other people say, maybe you're susceptible to the recommendations Amazon makes. Google has changed the way 1 billion people think about information. When I say Google, I of course mean Baidu, Yahoo, and others as well. And Facebook, WeChat, has changed the way I think 1 billion people think about who they are and who they are in relationship to others. So it is not some fringe phenomenon which we have where some crazy people like me in the valley do funny things. But it is something which pretty much reaches most people in the world. In the second part of my talk, I want to do a little bit more detailed example of Amazon. And specifically, I want to look at what changed and what didn't change. Jeff Bezos always says, well, if you just solely focus on looking what changed, then you miss the things that are truly important. And if you're just an old fogey who says, well, we did that 20 years ago and it didn't work, don't waste your time, then you won't get to anything new either. So let's look at what has changed for Amazon. And what I want to show you here is the data strategy Amazon has. So here is the Amazon app, which you can download on your mobile, and it allows you to scan a barcode and to snap a picture. Let's say you're saying snap it, upload a picture to Amazon. Amazon compares it to the pictures they have in their database, and they come back and say, we need your help. It could be this item, or it could be that item. And then you say, of course, it is this item. So let's see what happened. You shared with Amazon that you're interested in a certain item. While doing so, you of course also share your geolocation, where you are, and Amazon knows that you are maybe in a shop right now looking at that item, or that you are sitting at home, or maybe at a friend's place. Then you have Amazon to disambiguate from the images which could be that item to actually the specific item that you're interested in, all in your own interest. So you're correcting the data Amazon has, and in addition to that, you're uploading a picture under the real-world conditions of lighting conditions, which are often very different from the conditions in a studio. And that data strategy makes the data Amazon has get better and better. Just like Google Maps, the more people use it, the system gets better and better. If a road is closed, there are no cars coming through, Google Maps learns that. So what changed is the focus on mobile. The focus on wherever you are, you actually interact with it, as opposed to, let's say, 10 years ago, where the focus was on the desktop, on the web. What changed also is a focus, as I mentioned with Google, same at Amazon, from algorithms of trying to tease the last bit out of the few data you have to just this big data mindset of saying, well, somewhere, somebody in the world has the data we need. What we need to create is an incentive for them to share them with us. So the move from an algorithm intelligence over some kind of business intelligence or customer intelligence about the customer, to customer intelligence by the customer, to what I call DI, or decision intelligence, or data intelligence. So that is a journey Amazon took. What has not changed are the principles which, Jeff Bezos believes in, which is ask for forgiveness, don't ask for permission. That must be very difficult for accountants to grasp. But let me give you an example how that gets, lived in the company. At every all hands, there are 2 awards given. The first award is called Government Award, and it consists of somebody getting a television. You might wonder why television. Because somebody thought each conference room, each meeting room should have a television set, not realizing that most people have laptops which can easily use Skype or other things used for conference calls. So you don't want to get that government award. The government award is given for people who follow exactly the rules but violate the spirit. For example, I remember in one of the all hands, one person listened in the call center, and the call center agent said, well, okay, I see that you want to return the pots and pans you bought yesterday. Yes, I see that they are now 20% off, and I see you want to get the discount. Why don't you send them in, and we send you a new pair, and then, we just, credit you the old price. Which was super complicated as opposed to just being empowered and saying, we give you the 20% credit, be happy, and please use it soon. They followed exactly the rules, but they violated the spirit of customer centricity. And then Jeff asks the person to come up, shakes the hand, and wish them the very best in their future endeavors, whatever they might be. On the other hand, the people who get the other award, which is just the used old Nike sports shoe, the Just Do It award, are people who did something against the rules, but in the right spirit of the company. So I know this is a different audience here. And some way I came a long way here to tell you such stories because I wanted to give the feeling about how actually you could potentially understand that somewhere else people think about numbers differently, but we all have the same thing in common. All we do is we count and we combine things into what Amazon calls a fitness function, you call a finance function. And in Amazon's case, it is driven by, does it delight the customer? Does it help people make better decisions? And here is an example of these data refineries. A data refinery takes the data that people create and give them back something. So let's say here is some kind of mask, and what shows up for customers who bought this item? What else did they buy? So first, you look at this. Here's the Asian kid. It makes sense that, it's cold and he needs, something around his neck as well. And then you look in another country, Amazon.co.uk. What is the item that shows up there? A baseball bat. So, same item in the United States, scarf, in the United Kingdom, a baseball bat. That is an example how the data gets refined. I invite you, try it out. It's not a fake example. It's a true example. So all of this is an example of how different data sources get combined to actually help customers make better decisions. The data sources started with manual data, where people figure out what items should be bought together. Then we had what I just showed you, the clicks, the searches people do. Then we have explicit data, like people writing reviews or people making lists. Then more current with mobile is trying to figure out what situation the person is in. Are they just running? Are they late to a meeting? Or are they just laundering around and figuring out what they should buy for their girlfriend? And then finally is the idea of having a social graph, social connections, the social consumer. And the realization is that 15 years ago, we knew that markets were conversations. People talk about items. Now, we know that conversations have become markets. Or in other words, this shift in mindset is that we move from addressing an audience, 35-year-old, say African-American ladies in the Bay Area, to addressing the connected individuals. Viewing people as being connected as opposed to being passive and being marketed to. Huge shift in how marketing works. So the most important thing of all of this from Amazon is that I want to get across to you the concept of a fitness function. Yes, we measure things, whether it was in physics, whether it's on the social web. But we need to weigh those individual parts. We need to put them together. So for example, rather than looking at which items are in stock or what percentage of the items you're offering are in stock, online you have something called view-weighted availability. That means if you are almost out of everything, but nobody actually cares for the items you're out of, and the items people actually view you have in stock, that's much better than if you are almost with everything in stock, but everybody wants to buy the item and looks at the item you're out of stock. So you now know what everybody's interested in. And you want to not just have an overall availability, but you want an availability weighted by what people's interest is. So what might still seem weird in the physical world, that you try to figure out what a customer wants, was day one in the online world, in online commerce. So many terms go into this, hundreds of terms go into this. And if somebody is interested in retail, I'm very happy to have another conversation with you later and just show you some of the other ideas that enter there. And for those who do innovation based on experiments, the fitness function is what you actually need to write down at the beginning. Don't do the experiment first and then figure out what you want to do. But write down the question, write down the evaluation as you would write down the finance function before the data is coming in. A couple of days ago, I saw a new example for the fitness function. And that was on the BBC, October 9th, 2014. Comedy club charges per laugh with facial recognition. Interesting. A comedy club in Barcelona is experimenting with charging users per laugh using facial recognition technology to track down how much they enjoyed the show. Each laugh is charged as 30 euros, 23p, with a cap of 24 euros. How interesting is that? So rather than going in, you now get observed, and whenever you laugh, 23p down into the pocket of that club. What do you think about this? This is a fitness function or an objective function which is much more fine-grained and can now measure for the performer too where they are successful. Much more fine-grained, much more high granularity than only overall ticket sales are up. So I leave it up to you to think about what are the parallels? How can you transfer something like this to what you do in accounting? How can you create that granularity, like people paying by the laugh? How will that change the world? So if you had all the data in the world readily available at your fingertips, what would you do differently if you ran that club in Barcelona? There's a whole field called people analytics. People analytics means that you measure in a company, it used to be called human resource HR, but now most of what HR does, they are brought in when you do fire somebody. So people analytics is where you try to observe the interaction between people. MIT Media Lab has something called a social bag. It's a bag people wear, like with an RFID, but it also measures your relationship to the other person. Are you engaged? Are you listening? Are you just hoping that the meeting will be over? hoping that this talk will be over. When are you in good shape? How much are you moving around? What are the informal relationships between people? And then, based on those sociometric badges, in this people analytics world, they reorganize the office. Another example is at Google that if you call a meeting and you tend to always run over, it will show that as you call the next meeting. How is it influencing the behavior as you're measuring things about people in the company? Another example I learned from a friend of mine who works for Rio Tinto here is that they actually mine the travel data they have. I mean, they travel a lot, it's a big company. And what they have is they don't just have how much did you spend on a ticket, or as a German company called Air Miles does, they give you compared to your competitor like BHP here. No. They have very complicated metrics where they figure out, well, what is really the lost time? If you have a bad connection, you might save $100, but you lose a day because you don't get good sleep and you're tired the next day when you're in the office. So that is what I mean by saying we need to work on those objective functions, on those fitness functions, or as you might call it, on these finance functions. Jeff Bezos and I probably spent 50 hours working with different teams, just fine-tuning the terms and convincing them or being convinced by them what the terms should be in those functions. So, rule number 3 is you need to base the fitness function on metrics that matter to your customers, not to your suppliers. And sometimes I say, not to your accountants, but I shouldn't say that here. And just to recap, rule number 1 was to start with the question, not with the data. And rule number 2 was to focus actually on decisions and actions. Now, most of what you do is about transactions, and in many cases it's about people. So in the next part, I want to talk about that shift in identity which we have seen happen here. And I was very happy to see an article here in the black where somebody talked about identity on LinkedIn. So I teach a course at Berkeley this quarter called Social Data Revolution, and we just had the head of the data mining group at Berkeley, Simon Zhang, come to class last Tuesday. He runs a group of 140 people who basically refine the raw data that people, like probably most of you, supply LinkedIn with. And one of the questions there is really, what can you do? What can you provide the end user with? And what is the identity? How do you think about LinkedIn? Is it just a collection of resumes? Well, actually, LinkedIn is pretty good to know what companies are doing, because they understand the flow from one company to another one. They have, like Google has PageRank, and Facebook has EdgeRank. They have PeopleRank, and they have CompanyRank. And they know whether something is going well if the best talent leaves way before actually the company knows themselves. So you start looking around. Even the day before Lehman collapsed, the chief data scientist at LinkedIn, DJ Patel, told me that he thought there was a denial of service attack, like a computer attack, from Lehman coming, because so many people, the day before the collapse on a Sunday afternoon, all went on LinkedIn to update their resumes. So identity is key, and if you think about what's happening now in terms of business model innovation, we call it the sharing economy, where people offer resources that traditionally weren't being offered for other people to use. Examples are, if you have a spare bedroom, Airbnb, well, you can advertise your room. Now, to have a random person stay at your place, I wouldn't be comfortable with that, and probably most of you wouldn't be either. But if you know things about that person, about their Facebook persona, which is not that easy to create, about maybe even some friends in common, and vice versa. That person is very vulnerable who's staying at some random person's place that night. If they figure out who else has stayed there, suddenly Airbnb is bigger, has more rooms than the entire Marriott group combined. Or Uber, Sidecar, Lyft, where the idea is that you're driving, you can take someone in your car, and that's an attack against the taxi and limousine commissions around the world. Or Real Alliance, Get Around, where you actually give your whole car away. For example, I have a car, and actually don't know where my car is, because I left it in San Francisco at the airport, and being safely thousands and thousands of miles away, really rides. Let somebody have my car, and I get paid for whatever they do with my car. And should I come back early, there will be another car which I can use instead. So if somebody doesn't return the car in time, no worries, I will just be able to use another car. So just think about what that does and what that requires for identity in this world here, where data really is where most of the innovations lie. And for me, identity really, in essence, is coming from Facebook. Yes, it is about content creation, self-expression. It is about content distribution. Most of my news I get curated by my Facebook friends, but more than anything else, it's about identity management. You might have seen this cartoon in 1993, 21 years ago. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Small change. Now, on the internet, everyone knows you're a dog. In the last part, I want to give you an example of where I think there is something happening which would be of interest, and that is Bitcoin. And not Bitcoin as a currency, but Bitcoin as a trust system. So part of what I understand the job of a CPA is that people trust the data you're creating actually is right. Bitcoin doesn't trust anybody. Bitcoin does. Trust is distributed. But every single piece there, if you single coin, if you will, has its entire history embedded in it. So what would that do for the future of accounting if everything you have has its entire history, so-called blockchain, always being carried as part of it? Every single thing is traceable, accountable. I don't know the answer, but we see that different notion of trust. Rather than having an institution, a big accounting firm, we trust them. No. We just see each item having its history carried with it. What would that do? So, don't know the answer, but for sure, it is another example of innovation enabled by data. I looked at what companies people come from, and I will just give a couple of remarks here on this slide. What I think the future means based on the data, the social data we create. Social data is data that people create or data that people share. One, future of finance. A friend of mine, PayPal co-founder, then Slide CEO, Max Levchin, came to class 2 weeks ago. He now runs a company called Affirm. Affirm is a payments company, so in that way he's come back full circle to PayPal. A payments company that figures out on which conditions we should give you a loan. In contrast to the credit systems, the credit bureaus, or Fair Isaac in the United States, looking just at a few variables every quarter. That's how your FICO score gets determined, which makes all the difference whether you're getting the loan for a house or whether you're not getting the loan for a house. They look at 7,000 variables. Think about that from an accounting perspective. That they build a very complicated model, but a way better model than if you only look at a couple of variables. Better in the sense that they manage to make much clearer predictions in their fitness function of whether somebody is going to default or not. So, if you had all the data in the world, what would you do with it in finance? Where's fairness here? Would you then, if somebody just unlikely to pay back, would just say, sorry, no money, no honey, no honey, no money, whichever way around it is? Or would you want to give them another chance? I don't know the answers, but we are not that far away with the question, because they can build very good models on people's propensity to actually pay a loan back. Second, future of work. I mentioned people analytics. Now, I've heard that there are companies where you're required to wear one of these Fitbits or Jawbones or Nike Fuel Bands, one of these devices which measure your activity at home, 24/7. Now, on the one hand, you could say, for the fitness function of that company, knowing that you didn't get enough sleep last night, for whatever reason, well, they might actually do the right thing by telling you as you're coming in the morning, I'm sorry, we have a very important meeting today, and we know you didn't get enough sleep. We hope you don't mind that we swapped you out of that meeting, and we have somebody else taking your position here today. But that's scary. But if you had all the data in the world, what would you do with it? Would you then feel that, I'm not looking at this, or would you look at this and figure out what is the best, how we can use the employee? Or what my perspective, of course, would be as an employee, I would say, what is it that you can do for me? Maybe you made me too much stress yesterday. That's why I didn't get enough sleep. So let's actually work on that. Which way does the balance of power go? Or future of work as an atomization of work. Odesk is a Bay Area-based company which is a top 20 employer in the Philippines, where tasks get chopped up in small parts. Now, which of the tasks you are doing, whether it's in a big firm or as a one-man band, which of the tasks do you worry about that somebody somewhere far away who has a very different infrastructure cost from yours here in Melbourne, that they will get partitioned out? How can you be part of that ecosystem? How maybe can you actually outsource some of your tasks in this Odesk, Elan's future of work ecosystem? What is the role of identity here? How do we know that that person is a good job versus that other person who might be cutting corners? Future of learning. So I love to teach. And for me, seeing that not much has changed in a classroom or in a keynote like this one compared to what we would have done, probably 500 years ago, is quite sad. So what is it that makes us not adopt a much more peer-based approach, a much more individualized approach to learning? So Jerry Yang, the founder of Yahoo, and I have lots of discussions here how we can actually bring things which we have, and this brings me to the next point here, the future of health, in quantified self, in measuring things about people, knowingly and willingly, not talking about that Fitbit at home which shows the employer that you didn't sleep well the night before, but where people want to actually learn and know what it is that they should be doing at a given moment. Or, as it is the case with Google Glass, if it knows that I'm curious about something or someone, that there is this teachable moment, should it show me then, for instance, when I'm in China, that is the character Andreas which you always forget. Future of health. Another big question is, assume you had all the data in the world. So that water cup in front of you, you leave enough DNA on that when you throw it away, as you're going home, somebody could reconstruct your DNA from that and make predictions of how likely you are to actually have certain diseases when you get old. What do you think about that? The data exists. It might still be an expensive thing, a couple $100, but the price drops exponentially. How do we want to deal with risk here? How do we want to account for those things? Do we want to say, sorry, the way you're eating, your health insurance goes up. Where can we change behavior? And sorry, your DNA, what we see there, that will be no good when you turn old. What about the things where we can't change behavior? Future of community. So I talked about attributes about the person. I talked about relationships between people. But where the sum of the parts is not as much as the whole, where the whole is more than the sum of its parts. What can we do? And finally, what about the future of data? Particularly here, what about data ownership? So we know what it means to own an apple. I can eat it, I can give it to Graham, he can eat it, he can give it to somebody else. Once the apple is done, it's done. Now, for digital goods, for data, that's very different. Because if I give my data to Graham, and Graham gives me his data, then together we actually might have more than we individually put in. Very different accounting. 1 + 1 might be 3 in this case, and not just 2. Or data rot. The apple at some stage goes bad. What about data? The fact that the timescale of data is basically there forever. How do we think about that? That everything, in principle, will be discoverable. Although my accountant, he sometimes says, Andreas, I never heard that. But I think he means something else with that. So, what about the time horizon of data? Just as important as the question about data ownership. So in all of these questions, I want you to think about how the balance of power is shifting for you in your job, but also between the individual and the institution, like the citizen and the government, but also between the consumer and the retailer. What is data doing to this balance of power? So it's time to summarize. And I want to add to the 3 rules we had. Start with a question, focus on decisions, base a fitness function on your customers. I want to add the 4th one, which is embrace transparency. And I think there we probably pretty much are in the same boat. That what accountants do is to get to the ground of things. It is just that by now there are many other ways to triangulate that. An example is from a company in the United States which sells cars. People looked by just spidering the web of what they had on their lots. And the day before the earnings announcement was due, they said they haven't been selling much. Because they knew what the inventory was at the beginning of the quarter, what was at the end of the quarter, and the CEO in the last moment had to pull the prepared earnings announcement, which was not quite the way it should have been, and just said, yep, that company that has been spidering us, they were right. It was a bad quarter. So, as you're getting ready to bombard me with your questions, I have a couple of questions for you. Namely, do people understand the value they get out of giving you data? Give to get. So yes, I share my geolocation in order to know, turn left at the next intersection, followed by turn left at the next intersection. But when do you ask people to give you data without them seeing the value they get? The second question I asked a couple of times already is, does your product or service get better with data, get better over time? Google Maps, Amazon Pictures, or does it get worse? These are a couple of questions here. If we look back, 84, 94, 2004, 2014, how has data, social data, mobile data, cloud meaning accessibility, the data refineries, how have they changed you in the last few years? And what do you think? How will data change you, your community, your profession, your society in the next few years? So, I don't know about the next few years, but for those of you who might only be here virtually, like the people in Tasmania, I'll actually be back in Australia in a month. And I'll be at the Wired for Wonder conference. So if some of you are in Sydney, I hope to see you then. And Weigend.com has more information. If you want to get the slides of this talk, they will be up. And also, this is a very good article which was written in the black. These are just a couple of things which might help you if you have questions. But now I turn over to Graham, who might have some questions, and then we should also take some questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was somewhere between enlightening and bloody terrifying, actually. How do you find the regulators? Are you starting to pick up the regulators protecting privacy more? I noticed in that case, I think it was in Spain, where some person basically got Google to take him out of the search engine. Are you finding regulators are starting to push back on the data collection at all?
Being a regulator must be very hard. About a year and a half ago, the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, invited me to talk about, my views on privacy in the do not track context. And the specific example with Spain, all that Google can do is to say, sure, we're taking off the link. If somebody actually is entering now that lawyer's case, that thing will not show up anymore. But I ask you, that is the right to be forgotten, but isn't there also a right to be remembered? So what if Google doesn't like you and say, Graham, sorry, if somebody enters your name, nothing happening anymore?
Pretty much the case.
So, very difficult questions. And it's clearly not to be solved by regulation, I think. It is, probably by mindset. Gave an example in a conference in Sao Paulo recently, where a friend of mine, if he doesn't like something on a dating site, he puts up a screenshot of the person he doesn't like and puts it on Facebook. And the Twitter Latin America said, oh, that's violating the rules of service, the conditions of, whatever. And I said, who cares? How do the social norms shift? Do we think that dude is really weird that he's putting a screenshot up? Or do we think that other person is really weird? Look what they said to him. It's not about regulation, I think. It's about social norms evaluating. It's about us. If we had all the data in the world, what would we do with it? Thinking through, what do we want to do with it?
Now, we've got some time for some questions from the floor, so roving mics around. There's one down here that I can see, just there.
Thanks, Andreas. That was a great presentation. You'd asked the question, if we had all the data in the world, what would we do with it? What are the examples that you're seeing of where perhaps people are going too far or crossing that line to be perhaps creepy or just plain wrong in terms of how they're using our data?
I gave you an example where I think if somebody would like me to wear, a device which tells them, when I go to bed and where to go to bed, that would go too far for me. I think it is society, it's us coming up with points if we think that people go too far, that we're responding against them. But it is not somebody making rules like the right to be forgotten. What examples do you have where you think things go too far? I think each of us has their own boundary here. And what comes up in the examples I gave you from these 6 or 7 verticals is that the boundary between amazing and creepy is just very, very, very tight. That something which you might find amazing, wow, I didn't know that Amazon would, really know what I want to buy. Somebody else might react against and say, oh, that is creepy. So data is always needing interpretation in the refineries for sure. And I have to say, sometimes the people Facebook suggests, it's just amazing. Just a couple of weeks ago, I played the cello, and there was the German Youth Symphony when I was in high school. And my, Pultnachbar, the guy next to me in the cello group, he has been living in Japan for 20 years. And Facebook just said, do you know Clemens Doll? And I thought, that is just amazing. We have no friends in common on Facebook. How did they figure that out?
Amazing. Any further questions from the floor? No. All one, yes?
As an active table there.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how the local interactions happen.
You're getting about 29 cents.
Some marketeers sitting here, Andreas, and I'm a marketing manager by trade, so I think like most of my colleagues, I salivate at the world of big data. I'm very interested to know, recently you were talking at the UN, I read an article there where you were quoted with a very interesting quote, which was that big data is the new oil. So I was quite keen to find out a little bit more about what you actually meant by that. I thought it was quite interesting.
Yes, so I was very fortunate, very honored to give a speech to the United Nations General Assembly on that topic, data is the new oil. And what I said was that it is probably the resource of the 21st century. But by itself, it is useless. So regulators can, force Google to shove over some raw data, and Google probably happily does it because to understand those data, that's where the art really comes in. And that is where the refineries come in. So the reason I use this metaphor is that I talked about data creation, and we're not going to run out of bits anytime soon. Talked about the exponential increase at the beginning. Then about distribution. Distribution is social. But then most interesting about what does it mean to refine data and then to create products that people actually want to consume. So it was this sort of data supply chain, or as a friend of mine calls it, a data alchemy that I was referring to in that UN speech.
Any further questions from the floor? Just while we're waiting there. No?
Just don't be shy. Ask anything. I already asked you about Laksa here. So I think after that...
You've skipped over why you've got green shoelaces. Have you got a plausible explanation?
I tell you that. I was at the advisory board of DBS, the Development Bank in Singapore. And I was wearing sneakers. And they airbrushed my shoes out of that picture, like they do at the conference of Yalta, and Stalin didn't like the guy. So my assistant said, Andreas, we need to get you a pair of black shoes. And so these are a pair of black shoes.
You didn't want to be too conservative.
And they came with the green shoelaces.
Yes, I think they'll catch on, Andreas, in about 400 years' time. Now, your role as chief scientist is an interesting one, because with CPA we're dealing a lot with people's careers and career choices and where they end up in life. How does someone end up a career as a chief scientist, and what is a chief scientist at an organisation like Amazon?
I think Jeff realized the power of experiments, and he turned to somebody who has done experiments in physics before and who didn't run away from big data. We didn't call it big data then, but we call it big data now. And so I was super happy to work there as the one and only chief scientist after I left. He didn't want another one, I think. But there is a whole new breed, and the course I teach at Berkeley is part of the data science program. So many people are curious about what a data scientist is, not just some random scientist. And that is interesting, that this curiosity, that wanting to collaborate with others, wanting to tell stories about data, that willingness to handle it in some way or other, that is actually something which was very rare like 10, 15 years ago, where you of course had statisticians and they have tests to milk the last bit out of the data, as you might know, until the data confesses. But with the data-rich world we live in, just this different mindset of just having different tools. And it's not about tool sets, it's not about the skill set, but it's really about the mindset, what to do with these tools. I think that started at Amazon, but also Google, Facebook, other good companies, which are big data companies, about 10 years ago.
It's no surprise the big data collectors are some of the big successful companies at the moment. They're obviously at the cutting edge of it, aren't they? And using what they're collecting for their own business models.
Yes, for their own business model, but ultimately all the companies I know are companies that have end users. So I know nothing about B2B, but if there's some end user on the side and this give to get, that they are more than happy to share data with the company, or in the case of Twitter, with the world, if they get something back. But they will quickly stop in doing so if what they get back is not what they wanted. Let alone that creepy thing the lady over there was talking about.
That's right. She's got a particular interest in creeps, Lisa. What's going on there? We've got time for one more question if there's any more. Otherwise, we'll... no shy people that just want to ask it. There we go. One on...
Yes.
The lady that's not wearing the green shoelaces.
How do you know?
I can see. I've got a data thing under there.
I can share. I mean, you can have one. Yeah, sorry.
What would you do if you had access to data in the world?
Actually, can you get a bit closer to the microphone, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
You've been posing the question about what would we do if we had all access to all the data in the world. What would you do with all the data in the world?
He's lost for words, unheard of.
That's a good question. I'm good in showing the trade-offs. I'm not good in actually saying, this is what you should do. What I think I would do, and there was on the board, for instance, of a company which did that, is trying to make dating better. So I think helping people, make better predictions about the people they want to hang out with in the long term. That's what I would do with it.
Took him a while. I was going to suggest you just give it to me and I'd sell it to some people and make a quid. So we'll wrap up the session this evening.